Julie Andrews was Hollywood's perfect nanny, sweet, proper, and always smiling. But behind the scenes, there was a side of her the world didn't see. Now, 89, she's finally speaking out and sharing some surprising, even cheeky secrets from her past. Turns out, the real Julie is a lot more daring than the characters she played. Background on Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews was born Julia Elizabeth Wells on October 1st, 1935, in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey, England. Her mother, Barbara, married a teacher named Ted Wells in 1932, but Julie later found out that Ted wasn't her real father. She was actually the result of an affair her mother had with a family friend. Julie didn't learn the truth until she was 15. And she didn't share it publicly until many years later in her 2008 book. When World War II began, her parents split up and later remarried. Her mother married a performer named Ted Andrews, and her father married a woman named Winifred, who had worked in a war factory. During the war, Julie lived for a time with her father and brother in Surrey. But in 1940, she moved in with her mother and stepfather. Her dad hoped they could help her grow as a performer. At first, she called her stepfather Uncle Ted, but her mother wanted her to say Pop instead. She didn't like the change, and life with them was hard. The family was poor and lived in a rough part of London. Julie later said that it was a very dark time. Her stepfather drank too much, and even tried to come into her room late at night, so she put a lock on her door. As her parents' careers in show business improved, things got a little better. The family moved to nicer places, eventually settling in Hersham, her mother's hometown. Her stepfather believed in her talent and paid for singing lessons. Julie first studied at the Cone Ripman School, now known as Tring Park School for the Performing Arts, and then trained with Madame Lillian Stiles Allen, a well-known soprano. Julie said Madame Stiles Allen had a big impact on her life. She called her a third mother. Madame believed Julie had a rare and beautiful voice, with amazing tone and range. Some people even said she had perfect pitch, but Julie later said she didn't think that was true. She described her own voice as very pure, white, and thin, the kind of sound that could attract dogs from miles away. After her time at Cone Ripman, Julie continued regular school at Woodbrook, a local school in Beckenham, while still focusing on her music training. Julie Andrews' early career. Julie Andrews began performing in 1945 when she was just 10 years old. For the next couple of years, she sang on stage with her mother and stepfather, though she wasn't listed on the program. She remembered the excitement of being told to nap in the afternoon because she'd be performing with Mummy and Pop that evening. In those early shows, she stood on a beer crate so she could reach the microphone, singing either alone or in a duet with her stepfather while her mother played the piano. Looking back, Julie once joked that she probably sounded awful, but the audience seemed to enjoy it. Another young performer at the time was Petula Clark, who was 3 years older. The two toured together, traveling by train to sing for British troops. They even slept in the luggage racks. Petula later said, "It was fun." And not a lot of kids were having fun. Julie's big break came when her stepfather introduced her to Val Parnell, a powerful theater manager. At just 12 years old, she made her professional solo debut at the London Hippodrome on October 22, 1947. She sang a difficult opera piece called Je suis Titania in a show called Starlight Roof and performed there for a full year. One of the other performers was an American comedian named Wally Boag. He made balloon animals on stage, and Julie would pretend to be a child from the audience asking for one. Then she'd tell him she could sing, and when she did, the crowd went wild. Julie later said she stopped the show cold because people were so amazed. Just 1 year later, on November 1st, 1948, she became the youngest solo singer ever to perform in the Royal Variety Show at only 13 years old. She sang in front of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth at the London Palladium, sharing the stage with stars like Danny Kaye and the Nicholas brothers. From there, she followed her parents into radio and TV. She sang on a BBC comedy show called Up the Pole and acted in Educating Archie from 1950 to 1952. She likely made her TV debut in 1949 on a BBC program called Radio Olympia Showtime. In theatre, Julie performed in several classic British pantomimes. She played roles like Princess Badroulbadour in Aladdin, the Egg in Humpty Dumpty, and even starred as Cinderella. She also toured around the country in plays like Jack and the Beanstalk and Little Red Riding Hood. In 1952, Julie did something completely new. She lent her voice to a character in a movie. She played Princess Zaila in the English version of the Italian animated film La Rosa di Baghdad, renamed The Singing Princess. It was her first film role and her first time doing voiceover work. Mary Poppins and film stardom. In 1963, Julie Andrews began work on what would become her most iconic role, Mary Poppins. Walt Disney had seen her on stage in Camelot and knew right away she was perfect for the part. At first, Julie turned it down because she was pregnant and returning to London to have her baby. But Disney wouldn't take no for an answer. "We'll wait for you," he said. After giving birth to her daughter, Julie got a call from P.L. Travers, the author of the Mary Poppins books. "Well, you're much too pretty, of course," Travers said. "But you've got the nose for it." Disney even rented a house in Toluca Lake, Los Angeles, so Julie and her family could settle in during filming. Julie relied on instinct to shape her performance. She imagined a whole backstory for Mary, created a ladylike walk, and added subtle gestures that helped bring the character to life. The production was physically demanding and technically complex, but Julie later said she couldn't have asked for a better introduction to film. Mary Poppins became the most successful Disney film to date. Variety called Julie's performance a signal triumph and praised her fresh, natural presence. The movie was nominated for 13 Academy Awards and won 5, including Best Actress for Julie. She also won a Golden Globe and a Grammy with her co-stars for Best Album for Children. In a clever moment of humor, Julie ended her Golden Globe acceptance speech by thanking a man who made a wonderful movie and made all this possible, Mr. Jack Warner, the studio head who had passed her over for the My Fair Lady film. Wanting to avoid being typecast as a nanny, Julie next starred opposite James Garner in the 1964 film The Americanization of Emily. She loved the project, calling it her favorite film, a feeling James Garner shared. Critics praised her heartfelt and comedic performance, and she earned a BAFTA nomination for Best British Actress. Next came The Sound of Music in 1965, another role that would define her career. Julie admitted that at first she thought the story was a little too sweet. But once rehearsals started in London and filming began in Salzburg, Austria, she quickly connected with the character of Maria von Trapp. Filming was slow due to unpredictable weather, but Julie made the most of the experience. She used the lyrics of the songs to help ground her emotionally and shape Maria's spirit. She later wrote that Austria and its music lived in her soul. The film got mixed reviews, but critics singled out Julie for her energetic and heartfelt performance. For playing Maria, she won her second Golden Globe and earned another Oscar and BAFTA nomination. She later reflected that the chance to play her first 3 film roles, Mary, Emily, and Maria, was a gift and a privilege that could have satisfied her career on its own. After The Sound of Music, Julie made a guest appearance on The Andy Williams Show, followed by her own Emmy-winning NBC special, The Julie Andrews Show, where she performed alongside Gene Kelly and the New Christie Minstrels. In 1966, Julie took on a dramatic role in Hawaii, the top-grossing film that year. She also starred opposite Paul Newman in Alfred Hitchcock's Torn Curtain. Hitchcock gave both actors room to explore their scenes, and Julie learned a great deal about filmmaking from him, especially about camera lenses and technique. Still, after expressing disappointment in her own performance during an interview, she received a stern letter from Hitchcock, something she considered an important lesson in professionalism. The following year, she brightened the screen again as the lead in Thoroughly Modern Millie. The film, with its light-hearted tone, was a welcome escape for Julie, whose stepfather had passed away just before filming. She called it a pleasant distraction that let her be playful and silly. Audiences loved it, and critics praised her for being both spirited and charming. The movie was a major box office hit and earned her another Golden Globe nomination. At the time, Thoroughly Modern Millie and Torn Curtain were the two biggest hits in Universal Pictures history. How did Julie Andrews lose her voice? In 1997, the world lost one of its most beloved voices, not to time, but to a tragic twist of fate. Julie Andrews, whose soaring four-octave range had dazzled audiences in Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, underwent what was supposed to be a routine surgery on her vocal cords. She had been struggling with vocal issues during the demanding Broadway run of Victor Victoria and was diagnosed with a lesion on her vocal cords. Some called it a benign polyp or nodule, but Andrews later clarified it was more like a cyst. The timing seemed right. The show was wrapping up, her schedule was about to open, and the touring production, led by her husband, Blake Edwards, was on the horizon. The plan was simple: remove the lesion, rest, and return to singing in a matter of weeks. What followed, however, was devastating. The operation, performed at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital in June 1997, left her vocal cords permanently scarred. A singer's voice depends on the delicate, flexible vibration of the vocal cords, and scarring renders those cords stiff and unresponsive. Her crystal-clear voice, once a marvel of pitch and purity, was reduced to a raspy whisper. Her speaking voice changed dramatically, and her ability to sing vanished almost overnight. "I don't think she'll sing again," Edwards said in a 1998 interview. "It's an absolute tragedy." Julie filed a lawsuit in December 1999, claiming she had not been adequately warned of the risks and that the surgery had ruined her ability to sing and precluded her from practicing her profession as a musical performer. The case was eventually settled confidentially. Her public statement at the time was painfully honest. "Singing has been a cherished gift, and my inability to sing has been a devastating blow." She tried everything to recover her voice. With the help of renowned surgeon Dr. Stephen Zeitels, some scar tissue was removed, and a portion of her speaking voice returned. But the damage was too severe. As Dr. Zeitels later explained, too much of her vocal tissue was gone. Nothing could fully restore it. Her singing range was reduced to a single octave. She could still reach the low notes, but the sweet spot in the middle was gone, and the high notes, once her trademark, were lost. Still, Andrews did not surrender. She became deeply involved in vocal health advocacy, lending her name and support to the Voice Health Institute and funding research into cutting-edge treatments. She served as honorary chair for symposiums, helped fund promising studies, and championed innovations like a biogel that could one day improve pliability in damaged cords. But science wasn't there yet, at least not in time to restore her voice. The loss was profound. Singing had been in her life since she was a child prodigy performing in music halls across Britain. In her 2008 memoir, Home, she described the joy of music with unmatched tenderness. "When the orchestra swells to support your voice, when the melody is perfect, and the words so right there could not possibly be any others. When a modulation occurs and lifts you to an even higher plateau, it is bliss." Grieving that loss wasn't easy. In 1999, she checked into a clinic in Arizona for grief therapy. In an interview with Barbara Walters that same year, she admitted, "I think to some degree, I'm in a form of denial, because to not be able to communicate through my voice, I think I would be totally devastated." Yet, remarkably, she found new ways to communicate. In 2004, She surprised fans by singing a specially written song in The Princess Diaries 2, Royal Engagement, carefully crafted to suit her limited range. It was a touching, hopeful moment. Not a return to form, but a reimagining of what was still possible. With time, Julie Andrews made peace with the silence. "I thought my voice was my stock in trade, my talent, my soul," she reflected in a 2015 interview. "And I had to finally come to the conclusion that it wasn't only that I was made of." Indeed, she wasn't. She continued acting, lent her voice to narration and animation, and embraced a flourishing second career as a writer. Through books, television, and public appearances, she reached new generations of fans with the same grace and warmth that had defined her earlier performances. 50 years after The Sound of Music, Andrews echoed its most iconic lyric. "When the Lord closes a door, somewhere he opens a window." For her, that window was wide open, and she soared through it, not with her voice, but with her spirit. Singing after a botched surgery. When Julie Andrews first started singing, it was the peak of her career. Everyone wanted tickets just to hear her angelic voice. She was a true star, but after a surgery went wrong, her big comeback show in London in 2010 left many critics and even some of her fans angry and disappointed. British media reported that a number of fans walked out during the show called The Gift of Music, an evening with Julie Andrews, and many others asked for refunds at London's O2 Arena. After the show, the lobby was crowded with upset people arguing with the staff. Julie had often said that her famous 4-octave voice never fully came back after her vocal cord surgery in 1997. She reminded everyone about this again when she first appeared on stage that night. She joked that she could still sing the hell out of Old Man River. But deep down, it was clear the situation was different. To help her during the concert, 5 young musical theater actors did most of the singing. In the second half, they also performed a semi-staged musical version of Simeon's Gift, a children's book that Julie co-wrote with her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton. Julie took on the role of narrator for that part. Critics pointed out that Julie sang only a few short parts during the 2-hour show. She mostly used a speak-singing style, like her old co-star Rex Harrison from My Fair Lady. Many said it was hard not to feel sad about how much her voice had changed. Even though she gave a nice version of My Funny Valentine, most of the time she sang only small phrases, speaking more than singing. Still, some of her old magic was there. Her perfect way of speaking and her warmth created a closeness with the audience that the younger singers couldn't match. AEG, the show's promoter, had called it a major comeback. It was Julie's first concert in London in 30 years, and her first real singing performance since the surgery. About 14,000 tickets were sold, with some seats costing up to £140, around $206 Canadian. But some critics were very harsh. One writer from the Daily Mail said it was clear that even though Julie knew the songs, she simply couldn't sing them properly anymore. As the night went on, it became harder for the audience to ignore this. Some good moments still came at the end of the show. Julie's performance of Cockeyed Optimist from South Pacific and the group's version of Edelweiss touched many hearts. Some critics wished the whole concert had been like those songs reimagined to fit her new voice, instead of trying to recreate the past. They said the show felt old-fashioned and stiff, and that maybe a few spoonfuls of sugar would have made the night feel a bit sweeter. Even with all the criticism, Julie still got several standing ovations. The love for her was clear. The audience was full of people of all ages, from little kids to seniors, and even stars like Elizabeth Taylor and Connie Fisher were there. Connie had won a BBC competition in 2006 to play Maria in The Sound of Music, the role that Julie had made famous years ago. Despite the struggles with her voice and the mixed reactions from critics, it was clear that Julie's connection with the audience remained strong. Her presence alone seemed to stir emotions that no review could take away. But a different kind of storm was brewing in Julie's life. Around the same time, she found herself fighting off ugly rumors that questioned her personal struggles. Addiction rumors. An American tabloid magazine had published a damaging story, claiming that Julie Andrews was battling drug addiction and had checked into a rehab clinic for treatment. The news shocked fans around the world. After all, Julie had always been seen as the picture of grace and control. The truth, however, was very different. Julie, then 63, admitted that she had indeed sought help at the Sierra Tucson Clinic in Arizona, but it wasn't for drug addiction, it was for emotional healing. She had been struggling with grief after the death of a beloved aunt, someone who had played an important role in her childhood and career. Combined with the heartbreak over her damaged singing voice after a 1997 throat surgery, the loss had become too much to bear alone. Through her lawyers, Julie made it clear she had never suffered from, nor received treatment for, any drug or alcohol dependency. She was hurt by the false rumors and was even considering suing the magazine for defamation. Her publicist, Jean Swarm, also spoke up, saying that the story was blatantly false. Julie's visit to the clinic had been about finding guidance and emotional support during a very painful chapter in her life, not about addiction. Back in 1997, Julie had been forced to leave the Broadway show Victor/Victoria after surgery to remove non-cancerous nodules on her vocal cords. The operation had devastating effects on her voice, which many feared was permanently ruined. Losing the thing that had once been her greatest gift had been a heavy blow. Combined with the death of her aunt, it made sense that she would need time and help to heal. Even while battling personal pain and public scrutiny, Julie remained the strong, dignified woman that fans had always admired. And through it all, the surgery, the heartbreak, the unfair rumors, something, or rather someone, was at her side through it all. But before we get into who that person is, let's take a closer look at Andrews' love life. Julie Andrews' relationship timeline before finding the one. Julie Andrews is one of the most beloved actresses of the last 6 decades, lighting up the screen in classics like The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. But while her career was dazzling and wide-reaching, her love life was much simpler and far more private. Andrews had just 2 great loves in her life. Her first was Tony Walton, an award-winning set and costume designer whose talent was as extraordinary as her own. Walton made a name for himself with his stunning work on musicals like Pippin and Guys and Dolls. He later won major awards across every field: a Tony for The House of Blue Leaves, an Oscar for All That Jazz in 1979, and an Emmy for Death of a Salesman. Their story began when they were just teenagers, both passionate about the world of theater. According to Andrews' memoir Home, their first meeting was almost like something out of a movie. Walton first saw her perform in Humpty Dumpty at the George Hotel in Luton in 1948. She was just 11, he was 12. Struck by her talent, he reached out afterward, and the two quickly became pen pals, a sweet and steady friendship that would later blossom into something deeper. 11 years later, over a quiet dinner at Walton's family home, they got engaged, almost without realizing it. We looked at each other and smiled. Andrews recalled, and I honestly don't know how it came about, but one of us whispered, "We should get married soon." On May 10th, 1959, Julie Andrews and Tony Walton tied the knot. Not long after, Disney came calling, offering Andrews the role of a lifetime in Mary Poppins. And when she stepped onto that magical set, Walton wasn't far behind. He designed the costumes for the now iconic film. In 1962, the couple welcomed their daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, and for a time it seemed they had it all: love, success, and family. But behind the scenes, life was becoming more complicated. That period was a struggle, Andrews admitted in an interview with Vanity Fair. Balancing a soaring career, motherhood, and marriage was no easy task. You love your husband and you understand where he's coming from, but you have such a strong bond with your kids. It pulls you apart in many, many ways. The pressure eventually took its toll. In 1969, after a decade together, Andrews and Walton divorced. Sadly, I separated from my lovely first husband, she shared during an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The marriage was over, and my head was so full of clutter and garbage. The breakup weighed heavily on her. Speaking to Now to Love. Years later, on it, Andrews reflected, "You feel like such a failure because it's certainly nothing you anticipate when you marry. I blamed myself for a great deal, although it was probably a little bit of both of us." Despite their split, Andrews and Walton stayed remarkably close, as friends, and often as collaborators. Walton later remarried Jen Leroy Walton in 1991, but his bond with Andrews never truly faded. When Tony Walton passed away on March 2, 2022, Andrews paid a heartfelt tribute to the man who had been by her side from the very start. "Tony was my dearest and oldest friend," she told People. "He taught me to see the world with fresh eyes, and his talent was simply monumental. I will miss him more than I can say." She added, "He was a titan of the arts, a doting father and husband, and beloved beyond measure." Meanwhile, Andrews' relationship to her second husband endured decades. The truth about her marriage to Blake Edwards. Though Julie Andrews may have lost her singing voice, she never lost the love that carried her through. Before the accolades and the tragedies, there was Blake Edwards, the director behind Breakfast at Tiffany's, and the Pink Panther films, and a quiet, almost cinematic meeting that would lead to one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories. The two first crossed paths outside a therapist's office in the late 1950s. In a 2015 interview with Good Morning Britain, Andrews smiled as she looked back on that first encounter. She said she had been driving one way and Edwards the other. After exchanging a few smiles, he rolled down his window and asked her if she was heading to the place he had just left. Andrews admitted the exchange sounded corny, but Edwards saw their early meetings, casual hellos, and fleeting glances in the middle lane on Sunset Boulevard as something wonderfully Hollywood. By 1967, both were newly divorced. Edwards, 13 years older and raised in Oklahoma, may have seemed an unlikely match for the British star, but 2 years later, they were married. A blended family soon followed, with Julie's daughter, Emma, Edwards' children, Jennifer and Jeffrey, and later 2 daughters adopted from Vietnam, Amy and Joanna, in 1974 and 1975. They were partners not only in life, but in art. Over the years, they collaborated on 7 films, including 10, S.O.B., and the Oscar-nominated Victor/Victoria. Even their flops, like the critically panned Darling Lily, didn't seem to rattle their relationship. Andrews later reflected that they had grown so close that the outcome of the film simply didn't matter anymore. They had each other, and that was enough. In the late 1970s, the Edwards family took a step back from Hollywood and moved to Switzerland, a retreat that Edwards later said had saved their souls. During that time, he poured himself into writing, a process that, according to Andrews, helped him face his inner demons. He also used that creative space to shape some of Andrews's most daring roles, having long worried that she had been typecast by the endlessly cheerful personas of Maria von Trapp and Mary Poppins. He wanted the world to see that she was much more than sugar and song. And he was right. Even after Andrews' voice was taken from her by a botched vocal surgery in 1997, an event that might have ended another performer's career, she found new ways to express herself and reinvent her artistry. And through it all, Blake remained by her side. When Edwards passed away in 2010 following a battle with pneumonia, Andrews lost not only her husband of 41 years, but also her most steadfast supporter. Speaking in 2015, during the Sound of Music's 50th anniversary, Andrews described their marriage as a true love story. She said their success had come from taking it one day at a time and that somehow 41 years had gone by just like that. Even 5 years after his passing, Andrews admitted the grief still lingered. She said there were days when everything felt normal, when she could be herself, and then, out of nowhere, the sorrow would hit her like a punch in the gut, and she'd find herself wishing he were still there. But, she added, in some ways, he still was. That kind of love, she said, never really leaves you. What do you think? Would Julie Andrews still be performing today if her voice hadn't been altered? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Tap the next video on your screen. You'll love what we've got in store.